a wise woman of colour once said to me, you know, I do this work, you know, to not just to benefit me and my children, but also I know it's a long game, and ultimately race work in this country cannot truly progress until we reckon with the history of colonisation. We can't actually do anything until Australia, the fiction of Australia, comes to deal with all the damage that's been done and move forward. So with that, the work that we're trying to do today is a very small part of what we actually need to do. But, let me introduce myself. So my name is Shani. I am the co-founder of the recently rebranded Queer Family Violence Sector Network. And today's event is a partnership between that network and Rainbow Network. So people who are here today are from both networks, or not from any networks, or have networks of your own. And there's lots of that interrelation between both of them. So Rainbow Network is primarily made up of people who work with youth or LGBTIQ plus young people. And the Queer Family Violence Sector obviously works with people who work with LGBTIQ plus people experiencing family violence or partner violence. So there's a massive correlation between those two, massive links between those two sectors, especially because our queer young people are kicked out of home, therefore experience family violence from their families of origin at such high rates. So that's why we're here today. So you might feel free to talk to each other, make connections during breaks today and things, because there's lots we can all learn from each other. So in terms of why we're here, I'm going to cover a bit of that, but I wanted to kick us off with a quote from Kavai Vanon, who is one of my favourite queer non-binary people of colour in the world. They're a very famous poet, spoken word artist, performer, incredible human, fashionista, etc. And if you haven't ever heard them speak, or heard the name, if you ever heard them, haven't heard them on YouTube or anything like that, I recommend looking them up. They're amazing. They speak very eloquently about the links between disarming heteropatriarchy, taking it down, and the links between decolonising. Those two are very much interlinked, and Olg speaks very eloquently about it. So they once said, "None of us have simple stories. We are all as complex as all of the things that have been done to us." And today you're going to hear a lot of complex stories that come from the heart. Today's event is all about lived experience. And so take that with the generosity that it's been given and use it to better inform your practice. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Budi. Budi Sudarto is the Director of Undergrad Training and Consultancy and an AGMC committee member. Budi has been involved with the LGBTIQ plus communities for over 20 years.
Since I was 5! So I kind of ask whether most of you have understanding about LGBTIQ 101, and then I was told, well, you know what, just put it in there anyway, because we never know. And a lot of people, say, oh, we have to stop preaching to the choir. And one of my mentors actually turned around to me and said, well, the choir is actually rehearsing. The choir is practicing to fine-tune the way we think, the way we understand certain concepts. So if all of you sitting here and thinking, I know everything, there's nothing that you can teach me that I don't know, that's okay. That's all right. Yeah? Feel free to walk around, feel free to move around. Yeah? But those of you who are new to this space and kind of thinking, oh, I'm feeling a little bit intimidated right now, I want to ask questions, but I don't want people to kind of make fun of me or kind of look at me and roll their eyes, then this is a safe space for you. the questions that you have in your mind, someone else might have it as well. Yeah? So please, please, please contribute as much as you can. But what I really want to stress on today is the concept that sexuality is everything that makes us a human being, but at the same time, it is also contextual. And that's one thing that's working in the intersectional space that I really push for, I really make that point. How we display, embrace, come into terms, identify our sexuality is very much depends on context. And in the multicultural and multi-faith context, this is very evident in the stories that we heard from young people, for the not so young people, and also for people who are in the middle. So I'm part of that people who are in the middle. I am 40, but I'm not yet ready to embrace it. So the context is very important when we start talking about sexuality to young people. And quite often in this culture, in Australian society, we look at it from a Western lens. Yeah? What is sexuality? And immediately in our head we're thinking, well, you know, people are showing their affection in public, people are displaying their romantic feelings, people are this, people are that, people, a lot of examples that they give. Now, in a lot of cultural contexts, there's quite a very descriptive version of sexuality. So if I ask someone from my home country, Indonesia, and I ask them, so what's sexuality? Most of the time, the answer will be, you get married. My sexuality is very much tied on to the concept of marriage. And when I ask them, so does that mean that I can marry a man? And they're like, oh, no. It's about heterosexual marriage. Marriage to someone of the opposite gender. Yeah? So that kind of concept we need to really, we need to keep that in mind, because what their version of sexuality is just as valid as our complex understanding of sexuality in the Western context. Yeah? The other thing as well, especially from the faith communities, when we ask them about sexuality, sometimes they go back to the scripture. Well, this is what my faith is teaching me about sexuality. And once again, quite often it is about heterosexual marriage. So for me to express my sexuality, it must be contained within the framework of romantic relationship, content of marriage, and having a family. And that is completely fine as well. Yeah? Recently, I had a chat with someone who is from my home country, and that person is a bit more progressive. And he said to me, that concept now expand a little bit. So some people now start saying, well, you know, sexuality is about being in a relationship. It's not necessarily about being in a heterosexual relationship. So in some contexts, they start recognizing that you can be in a same-sex relationship or same-gender relationships, but sexuality is still framed within that context of relationship, romantic, intimate relationship. So when I talk to international students who just arrive here, and they kind of gone, Shahara is everywhere. Yeah? It's kind of, they kind of go, hang on a second, where am I? You know? And only a few weeks ago, there was a young person who identifies as a gay person, and kind of said to me, it was so shocking for him when he went on the apps. We know what the apps is, I don't have to mention it. Right? And his genuine intention, because of his cultural background, is to look for someone to establish a romantic relationship with, and he found it really, really confronting when all he received was physical relationships. Yeah? So we started talking about cultural differences more in Australian context. That's what it asks for. People are looking for that physical relationship. So we need to understand it, that not everyone has that broad understanding that we have. The other thing as well, in my travels, a lot of people think of sexuality as the others, the queers. Yeah? And when I ask them, who's in this room identifies as being heterosexual? And a few people raise their hands, and I'm like, congratulations, you just found your sexuality. Right? Because we don't often frame sexuality in the terms of heterosexuality. You know, I keep saying to people, heterosexuality is fine. The issue is it becomes heteronormativity. So there's a difficult description when everyone is seen as being heterosexual. That's where a lot of stigma and marginalization starts. Once again, the trichotomy model is an old model. I keep using it. The model, some people will argue that the model is a little bit outdated. In my work of working with a lot of different communities, including multicultural communities, this model still speaks to them. So I'm still using it. And I do like this model because it does allow for that movement, for our growth. Once we start embracing who we are, our identity, it does allow for that movement, but it doesn't capture everything. It does challenge the binary view of what sexuality is, and we kind of breaking it down into three main components: the feelings, the behaviors, and the identities. If you are familiar with this model, please feel free to contribute, and then we can have a really nice discussions around this. Let's start with the feelings. One thing that I would like to stress from this point is the feelings is internal, it's who we are, how we feel inside. I don't want to know about it, but in my line of work, people keep telling me. And sometimes I just feel like, I don't care. I can't do that, right? Because I want to have a job, I do that. It's your desire, who you're attracted to at that given time. And I really have to underline, bold, capitalize, big font at that given time. And this speaks volume to even within the LGBTIQ communities, because sometimes our community members can be our own worst enemy. So I remember one day I was hanging out with my friends, and there was someone that I found attractive walked past who happens to be a female from the appearance, and I made a comment, that girl is beautiful. The kind of people that my friends gave me, they're like, are you ready to jump ship now? Does that mean that you're bisexual now? So where's your gay membership card? We got to turn your card. Like, that's my feeling at that time. Yeah? So we have to really focusing on, especially working with many people, not just the young people. If they express a feeling that is different to how they identify, it's completely fine. It's part of human nature. We're human. Now, behaviors is another thing that's a little bit complex, especially when we're talking about intersectionality and multicultural, multi-ethnic communities. So again, in Western context, especially in the Australian context, when we think about behavior, we think about the actual act. We think about a certain act, because that's what's been sold to us, that's sexual behavior. In different cultural contexts, behaviors can be anything that they've considered as expressing their sexuality, their attraction, their emotional and physical attraction. So up there, I have a few examples: holding hands, kissing on the cheek, touching, even attires can be seen as expressing their sexuality. Are there any other examples here that you want to add on?
The way you go about relationships.
Okay, so the way you go about relationships can be seen as demonstrating sexuality. Okay, it can be seen as behavior. That's good. Thank you. Anyone else?
Gesture.
Gesture. So, in what way, if you don't mind me asking?
I guess gestures that are coded as being gay or being whatever.
Yeah. So thank you for that. So gesture or body language. Yeah. So as you can see, I like to flap my hands. Yeah. So that, even in my culture, that is seen as demonstrating my sexuality and my sexual attractions. Yeah. My great uncle is also like to flap his hands, right? Heterosexual identified because I asked. I was like, so I'm just, you're a psychologist, I'm just wondering if people ever wondered. He's like, yeah, all the time. Because the gesture, we have similar body language, but our sexuality is very different. So thank you for that. So cross-culturally, what we see as the expressing our sexuality is very different. One thing that some people have told me from culturally and religiously diverse communities is this feeling that they have to act and behave a certain way to be accepted as part of the mainstream LGBTIQ communities. Yeah? So some cultures are very much not into PDA, public display of affections. They think it's vulgar. Yeah? They engage in a relationship, and then their partners keep insisting on that, and they're experiencing some sort of a conflict. This is not my culture. This is not my faith. This is not how I was raised. So we have to be mindful when we're working with people that what they see as appropriate is very contextual. And just like the way we feel, our behaviors go so very across the continuum line. And I'm going to show you, I'm going to give you some examples where it can be quite damaging when we assume a certain behavior just because of someone's identity and how they have an impact on their well-being and their sense of belonging. So the identity is something that I have modified a bit from the module. So I break it down into two different concepts. So the self-identity, how we identify to the self, and the social identity, the identity that we project to others. For multicultural LGBTIQ, or I keep saying multicultural because it encompasses POC, people of color, and for multi-faith communities as well, the social identity is something that we need to be aware of. Including me, I'm a diversity inclusion trainer. I do LGBTIQ inclusive practice left, right, and center. My social identity is very contextual, depending on which communities I'm working with, which faith groups I'm working with, and that is completely fine. Yeah. So when I do this training in workplaces, I keep saying to them, you may not know that your colleagues sitting next to you identify as part of the communities because their social identity is projected in a certain way. So again, something that we mindful of. Identity change over time, that's fine. Again, if you look at the continuum line, I like the continuum line because it's continuum. There's no stop or start, it's just going. And also like the idea that it's working as a cycle. It's a cycle. Yeah, we keep navigating all those three elements. Now, this is where my experience of working with some young people, this continuum line can be helpful for them to actually feel that there is nothing unusual with how they feel, how they behave in their identities as well. Yeah? So if you look at the feelings line, when I was about 15, my feelings line is in the middle. Right? It's because at that time, that's when I started discovering what sexuality is all about. I'm a late bloomer. You know what sexuality is about, so my feelings is in the middle. My behavior when I was 15, because I was in high school, so I actually had a girlfriend. So my behavior was on the opposite sex. And back then, all we did was just holding hands. She tried to kiss me once, and that didn't work. She still made fun of me, I don't know, right? My self-identity back then was actually blank. And it is okay for any of these lines to be blank. I was 15, I just discovered what sexuality is, right? I just started embracing, I'm actually sitting in the middle. How I identified to the self back then was no idea. Back when I was 15, there is no such thing as the internet. So it was making it a bit difficult for us. My social identity, on the other hand, was very different. 15, still living at home with my family. My social identity is what? Straight? Well done. Yeah. That's how I presented myself to others. Yeah. So now you can start seeing that these lines, how useful it is to where I am now. And my feelings in the same sex or same gender. My behavior is very much still the same sex or same gender. My self-identity, I identify as a gay person. My social identity, again, like I said before, shifted depending on how safe I feel. As a Muslim person, sometimes I go to a mosque. In mosque, I do not need to tell them about my identity, right? That's not what I'm there for. I'm there to pray because I've been told that's what I have to do, right? So my social identity is like, there's no need to talk about. If they're like, do you have a wife? And I said no. And they're like, why are you 40? I'm like, yeah, that's fine, right? So they just assume that I'm straight, and that's completely fine. In Indonesian gatherings as well, when I go to Indonesian community gatherings here, it's also easier for me to just say I'm straight, not married. Yeah? So it's okay to have that social identity shifted. Now, this is why it's interesting for multicultural LGBTIQ, because in our context, in the Anglo-Australian context, the self and the social, quite often we've been told that it has to be the same. Yeah? And we heard a lot of stories about people who finding it difficult to explain to their friends why their social identity doesn't always reflect their self-identity. So now you know, there's a cultural issues, there's a faith issues there, there's safety issues there. So you need to take that into consideration. Now, who is familiar with the gender unicorn? Yes. So those of you who are familiar with it, this is just a refresher. Those of you who are new to this, we're going to take you to an understanding one by one. I also put in a link there where you can download it. So I like this model again. It kind of explains the difference between sex and gender. So sex aside at birth, let's start with that. So that is the biological, the physiological labels, and it is based on the scientific and medical model. And I've read quite a few journal articles now who actually challenge that narrow or simplified definition that male is XY and female is XX. Genetics, and they've all been kind of saying this, our chromosomes and our hormones are way more complex than that. So basically what they're saying is, let's stop thinking of sex based on whether you have, whether you're born with a penis or a vagina or a vulva. Then we got our gender identity, so how we identify the gender category that we feel the most comfortable to identify as. Once again, this is about you, not about other people. So your self-gender identity, it is okay for it to be different to your social gender identity, based on your comfort level, how you identify, and also your safety, and also the cultural and religious context that you find yourself in. Gender expression is a very interesting thing for me as well. So some people consider gender expression as the way they express their gender to other people, so a gender marker. Yeah? So if you look around your room, then we can quickly identify some of the social scripts when it comes to gender marker. Yeah? So just a quick roundabout. So our gender markers in a very conventional way, those who are men are expected to do what? To express themselves how? Have short hair, have beards, yeah? Short hair, beards, pants, yeah? Be muscly, yeah? So physicality, masculinity, yeah? No one mentioned jewelry. They usually came up in a lot of training, jewelry. Somehow our society has created a standard of men's jewelry and women's jewelry, yeah, and unisex jewelry. Why don't we just call it jewelry? Expression can be a little bit tricky as well, because for some people, even though their gender identity, they identify as a certain gender, their expression is not necessarily reflected. And I'm going to use my own example because I feel safe in this room. So it's only in the past 2 or 3 years when I started embracing my gender fluidity, my own gender fluidity, because I never in my brain that I thought that I am a male, quote unquote. A lot of people think, but you're gay, you just can't. I'm like, it's beyond campness. Yeah? So only in the past 2 or 3 years that I actually started to say that I'm gender fluid. My expression, however, look at me. I walk down the street, people will just say, yeah, boy, a gay boy. And I can say this, but you can't because it's racist. I'm a gay. Right? So our expression, again, is a reminder that we can't always detect or we can't always quickly label someone just because they express a certain way. Yeah? So it's always be something that we need to be reminded. Again, our physical attraction, who we're physically attracted to, non-emotional attraction, who we are emotionally attracted to. Yeah? And all of that can be different, and that is completely fine. So when working with multicultural communities, the concept of gender that is something that we need to be very, very aware of. Gender in this context and in this training follows the Western model of gender. When I do training with multicultural communities, in certain contexts, the concept with sex and gender, there's not even a word for it. They all belong to one word. And I'm currently working on translating some of the resources, and the feedback that I got from different languages is they themselves trying to find the best inclusive words to explain sex and gender. So you might encounter people who are born here, who are very familiar with the concept of sex and gender because they're born here, but you must hear the stories that when they're trying to explain it to their families couldn't understand it because of their cultural context. And so when color or multicultural youth accessing services, and they've been told it's okay, you can do this, you can do that, it's fine. If they don't get it, if they don't understand it, it's their problems or your problem. How do you think that makes them feel? Think about what they need from you at that given time. What they need, maybe what they need is for you to say, it's okay. You have your own understanding, your family have their own cultural understanding. Now, what can we do now to navigate your identity? What can we do now to help build a relationship with your family? Instead of telling them, you have to pick and choose. Sadly, we still hear that stories from practitioners. We still hear young people say, my counselors just don't understand. My youth worker, my case worker, they just don't understand. So that concept of individualistic and collectivist, we need to be aware of that as well. So like you said there, you're referring to the gender stereotypes and gender assumptions, male, female, strong, feminine, masculine. Again, those are made up words. As society, we created it, and as society, we implemented it. So we can challenge that. Some of the terminologies, I'm not going to go through them one by one, but I am going to focus on some of the cultural specific terminologies, and there are a lot more that we haven't heard. So Better Voice is a girl for the Indigenous Australians. I've been Filipino for Pertama, Pacific Nations, Katui, Hijra, Two-Spirited, and etc. So one thing that I've been told by people who belongs from these communities is that their identities are not the same as the Western context of trans identity. It's a culturally specific identity, have its own meaning, have its own interpretation in their culture. And it can be quite damaging for someone who maybe identifies as a female or Fatama, accessing your service, and what do you think in the box? Trans. It can be very damaging because you are not expecting their cultural identity and their cultural background. So let's stop thinking that these cultural terminologies are the same as the Western context. Start embracing it as their own in their own context. Pronouns. Okay, I'm laughing, not to be disrespectful, but I'm laughing because it reminds me of the many conversations I have to have with multicultural communities about pronouns. When they came to Australia, what pronouns were they taught? Two. He and she. To introduce another pronoun, they, because their brain is so used to what they're being taught, some people are not familiar with it and finding it difficult to use the and them as a pronoun. And when I do training with them, I say to them, it's okay. English-speaking people still confuse they and them as a singular pronoun, so don't stress. The point of doing this is basically to tell you now, to let you know there are some people who identify as being they and them, and it is important to use what they use. So again, small changes, be in the level they're comfortable with. So this is when we start talking about cultural safety, and this is taken from an article. This comes from the Maori, the New Zealand health settings. So you can bring it in your time. It is about shared respect, shared meaning, shared knowledge, experience of learning, living, and working together. And for cultural safety to be successful or to be applied, we need to go one step beyond that. We need to exercise cultural humility. And I bolded there all the important words that I think needs to be communicated. We rarely assume competence. How many of you here have attended cultural competency training? You have. Cultural competency training, in my view, there's a lot of issues with it because it's kind of prepare you to be the expert of a particular culture. We know culture is complex. I am not an expert of Indonesian culture. We have about 300 ethnicities, God bless. Right? So cultural humility is very powerful. I only know what I know. I have some background, but I have to be humble so I can really listen, appreciate, embrace, and celebrate who you are. Work collaboratively with the clients. We heard that in the morning. A lot of you came up with strategies that put the clients at the center instead of your knowledge and your needs. That's fantastic. The unique intersections of clients' identities. If we are not humble enough to actually acknowledge it, that every single person that walks through the door have their own unique circumstances, then we're missing out on something. We're missing out on creating that safety. Because safety is not just about us, it's also about them. They need to be confident that their identity will be embraced in your service. It's very crucial. So, because we're in the home stretch, I'm going to ask you to reflect on some of these points. The concept of positionality, you might have heard about it before, you might have done some research about it. But it's very important for us to actually position where we come from when we're working with multicultural and multi-faith LGBTIQ. We need to be confident enough to examine our own biases and stereotypes. Intersectional lens in program design and delivery. Quite often I get a panic email saying, we've designed this program but we're not getting the multicultural people, can you come in and help us? As an afterthought, can you tell us what we've done wrong? Can you tell us what we can do so these people access our services? And quite often I'm having conversation about, so who designed this? It's me and my manager. Okay. Do you ever consider from day one that you're working in an area where there's multicultural backgrounds? Oh yeah, we consider it. So did you invite them in? No, because that's too much. No, we don't have enough. So what happens? The languages that they use do not speak to the multicultural communities. The approach that they use do not speak to the multicultural communities. But we told the young people to come in and have pizza with us at our service, at our center. Then I asked them, so how many other people are using your services? Yeah, maybe about 200 a day. Are you having that gathering in an open space? Yeah, because we promote inclusivity. Can you see the problem of doing that? Yeah? Because that services may not be safe for these young people to access. And of course, I used that example before, but we're having an event at a pub. I'm like, here we go. Look, don't get me wrong, I like the pub, but not many people do, right? So we have to just talking about things. Challenge the norm, we talk about it. So what identities that has been normalized in our services? Are those identities reflective of the multicultural experiences? Again, is it based on the Christian traditions? Is it based on our ability? Yeah. My co-facilitator is someone with disability. And the amount of times when we have to check in to the training, to book a venue, to make sure that the training space is accessible. Huge thing. Financial accessibility as well. Yet a lot of people say, oh, you know, we know young people don't have a lot of money, so we make everything free for them. Yes, financially it might be accessible to them, but it is emotionally accessible to them. So we have to start thinking, what is emotional accessibility? Are we actually meeting their emotional needs, or are we making assumptions based on the dominant norm? Because it's working with the Anglo young people, doesn't mean that it's going to work with the multicultural young people. How do we engage with them? How are we contributing to the social exclusion and marginalization in our engagement? If you're asking multicultural communities to come in and to fix the problem, what is the danger in doing that? We are asking them, we're putting a lot of expectations for them to be able to solve a problem. Yeah? So we have to start framing, rethinking the way we approach this issue. It's not about asking them to fix the problem. We identify the problem, we know we're at fault, we know from a design perspective there's some mistakes there, so let's reprogram, let's rethink, and let's start engaging them from day one. Yeah. And instead of asking, we tried this before it didn't work, what can you do to make sure that it works? Ask them. We want to work with your communities. Let's have an ongoing collaborative approach so we speak to each other. I am obsessed with workplace system, and I'm obsessed with workplace culture. In your workplace, please raise your hand if LGBTIQ inclusion is in every aspect of your workplace, from top down, from the board. Yay! It's not fair. From recruitment to the janitors, to the cleaning services. Yeah, people don't think about that. To the suppliers, to the volunteers, to the venues when you hold your events, all of that. That is workplace system. Quite often we're thinking workplace system as a structure. We have policies, we have LGBTIQ policies, strategies, but we don't often think beyond that. And intersectionality, when we identify that we need order system, where do we put intersectional identities in here? Are we meeting the needs of LGBTIQ of multicultural background? Are we meeting the needs of LGBTIQ of multicultural background with physical disability? Are we meeting the need of LGBTIQ individuals of multicultural background who are also part of the faith communities with physical disability who also experiencing financial difficulty? Keep asking yourself that question. Who are not invited to the table because we normalize certain identities and start working for them? It takes time. Our brain needs time to process it. I'm in the privileged position where I'm working for myself. You go back to your workplace with its own culture, system, and structure. So be kind to yourself. There are many times you will experience roadblock, and you just have to find that humility, that strength, that roadblock is something that you will encounter, that it is sometimes it is beyond your control, and think back, where am I doing this for? What is the client's need? How can I put this client at the center, and what can I do to truly invest their authentic self that is part of their culture, their faith, their sexuality, their gender, and also their intersex characteristics. So just be kind to yourself. You're working, you're doing such an amazing job in this context. I am here, hopefully, to take you to a journey where your current understanding can be elevated to start thinking about intersectionality. So on that note, thank you for putting up with me for 2 hours. I did not even give you a break. I just realized that. You've been listening, standing, sitting for 2 hours, and that takes a lot of strength. So thank you, and enjoy the rest of the day.